For many collectors, the Kenner Star Wars toys from the late 1970s and early 1980s are relics of a very special time. They encapsulate the excitement and never-before-seen worlds of the original trilogy. They represented the heroes we loved, the villains we loved to hate, and the multitude of strange aliens from a galaxy far, far away. And they were the action figures, vehicles, and playsets we brought home to continue the story after the theatrical credits rolled across the screen. But did you ever stop to think about the creators of these toys? Sure, George Lucas conjured up the Star Wars universe. But who made these action figures? Whose idea was it to put a telescoping lightsaber in the arm of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan Kenobi? How did something like the Death Star playset come together? One of the really fun aspects of Star Wars collecting is getting to know the designers and creatives behind the Kenner line. Hearing their stories of working at Kenner, of the challenges they faced, of their accomplishments, and how they brought to life the figures and toys we love has been rewarding, and something I never thought I'd experience as an adult. There's something magical about being face-to-face with the person who is able to say, "I made this." In many ways, it's the capstone of the collecting journey. To meet the one responsible for creating something that meant so much to you, to your childhood, and to your collecting years. And during the May 4th weekend, more than 150 collectors traveled to Kennesaw, Georgia for the Rogue Fun Collectors event. It was truly one of the best collecting trips I've ever experienced, and it supercharged my love for collecting and my connection to our wonderful community of Star Wars fans and friends. Rogue Fun's main event was held on Saturday, May the 4th, in the ballroom of Kennesaw's Hilton Garden Inn Hotel. Attendees were treated to 5 Star Wars and collector-related panels through the afternoon and into the evening, and each was just as fascinating as the next. Jerry Hancock opened the event with a look at the history of Sears and the power of Star Wars' presence in the retail company's holiday wish books. The second panel featured Gary Ray Weaver and Ryan Shaw, 2 avid Star Wars fans who have become legendary action figure customizers in our community. The third panel was a conversation with animator John Celestri, the artist responsible for bringing Boba Fett to life and introducing him to the world in the 1978 holiday special. And the fourth panel, which took place during dinner, was a presentation on publishing Star Wars collecting books with Paul Harrison, Rich Alott, and Steve Sansweet. If you'd like to hear any of the 4 panels, you can check them out beginning with episode 176. The event wrapped in the best way possible, with a conversation between 2 former Kenner employees responsible for creating some of the most memorable and beloved toys from the Star Wars universe. So for the last time, I'd like to take you back to the ballroom to hear the funny and fascinating stories they shared with us about their time together at Kenner. This is the 5th and final presentation in the Rogue Fun panel series. This is Kenner Stories with Howard Bollinger and Tim Effler. This is why you need to be in the room at the next Rogue Fun event. And this is Star Wars, Prototypes and Production.
From Coruscant to Tatooine, and every planet in between, Star Wars, Prototypes and Production, with your host, David Quinn.
Vader.
It's a trap!
Yes, Master.
Right.
Whoa, we're gonna have company!
Have to stand and fight.
The more you tighten your grip, Tom, the more star systems will slip through your fingers.
I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
The Force will be with you, always.
Final panel today is Kenner Stories.
And these are the stories from the creators of our beloved toys that we played with as children and now cherish and collect as adults. Presenting this panel are two former Kenner employees who made significant contributions to the creation of the numerous toy lines of Kenner. The first is Howard Bollinger, who is the former Senior Vice President of Product Concepts with more than 30 years of experience at Kenner. His long list of toy lines includes Star Wars, Mask, Treetops, Care Bears, Ghostbusters, Jurassic Park, Strawberry Shortcake, Littlest Pet Shop, and Batman. We'll be joined by Tim Effler, who's been in the creative development business for over 45 years. As Director of Product Concepts at Kenner, he contributed to many of their lines, including $6 Million Man, Star Wars, Batman, Ghostbusters, Nerf, and Jurassic Park. I can't wait to hear what story they share with us today. Please welcome Howard and Tim to Road.
Live.
Be careful what you say.
Narayan, can you bring in the high chairs out for us?
Or a wheelchair.
Yeah, well, since we both get knee replacements, Tim being the most recent and I being having mine done in February, we still are waffling and all that jazz, so hopefully we'll be able to get through this,
Right. So this is going to be a pretty free-forming discussion. We have a few slides that just are going to outline topics. And then we might say 3 words, I might say
something else. You might say something else.
Right. So, we put this together. I think more on the background between Howard and I. The 15 total years I was at Kenner, I always worked for Howard. And Howard was a fantastic boss. He was a tremendous mentor to my career, especially as it guided me as a manager and director of design myself. A manager and director of the creative process. He was really great in that aspect. And I can't say enough about this guy.
And conversely, Tim Effler was one of the best people I had ever worked for. Because he's very astute, very product oriented, and just a great friend. We kind of like talk the same language, and we were probably finishing each other's sentences many times.
All right. You probably go into
Do you want to end on time or no?
Yeah, also known as Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah, so a lot of you don't know about Howard, so I thought we should just talk a little bit. You can talk a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, well, I started at Kenner in 1969 as a graduate from University of Cincinnati Industrial Design Program. I had worked for 6 years prior to Kenner at a division of American Hospital Supply, designing wheelchairs and medical equipment and stuff like that. When I went to Kenner, I was hired by Chief Kuhn. I don't know if any of you people ever heard of Chief Kuhn, but he hired me in 1969, January, and I stayed with Kenner and then Hasbro for 33 years, taking early retirement in 2002. And I thought I'd put together all the business cards that I had as I rose through the ranks at Kenner and then Hasbro. And I started actually as a design engineer in the toy area, and finally I invented a few things and blah, blah, blah. And it went on from there. So that's it. And I'll tell you what, I never worked a day in my life at Kenner. It was the most fun and wonderful place.
Well, I worked a few days in my life. I did. So there are several all-nighter things, and you had presentations to make, and whatever. We worked hard. It wasn't like we came in and, lit up our cigarettes, which I did a lot at the time. When I started, I was a smoker, and actually started a fire. I started a fire, yes. Yeah. In the office I share with Jane Abbott and Linda Howe, and I lit up my practice was to light my cigarette. This is America. This is Mad Men style. Right? So in fact, drinking too, because the execs all had cabinets or something. But anyhow, I lit up a cigarette, and my typical, I was at my drawing table, my typical procedure would be to light the cigarette and then just throw the match at my waistband, because it's going to go out 99%. So I lit up, and then I walked out of this shared room, which facing the old Sycamore building, and which would have gone up like a torch because it's this old wooden floor thing. So I walk out and I'm engaged in a conversation with somebody in the hall, and then Jane Abbott, if you knew Jane Abbott, she was the most dry delivery person you could meet, So she comes out, walking up right up and says, "Tim, there's a fire in your office."
Very matter of fact.
Yeah, just matter of fact. That was Jane. Everything is matter of fact. So I run back in, and thank God it was one of those 2 feet tall, steel waste cans. But it had a campfire flame out of it. It was roast meat. I'm like, holy crap. So I just picked up a big drawing camera and put it over, and that was it. No word from HR. Did they even have HR? I don't know. But it was just like kind of some of the scenery.
Yeah, I got a funny story too. We didn't practice this at all.
No, we didn't.
That story.
So we're going off track already.
That story.
Wait a minute. You should be on my slide now.
Your story, so I'm go back to my slide. Okay. At one point in time, you may all know that Kenner, or let's put it this way, we were owned by General Mills at a certain time, starting about 2 or 3 years after I went in '69. Then General Mills took over Kenner completely, and we started getting some marketing people in, and well, I won't talk much about that. But we also had Rainbow Crafts, the manufacturers of Play-Doh in Cincinnati, joined in with Kenner as part of General Mills before, all that happened. And over in Rainbow Crafts, across the hall in the Sycamore building, what Tim just described, with the big long wooden steps and all this old, I don't know, it's old factory or something.
Yeah, it was old factory.
Well, there was a costing fellow in Rainbow Crafts that was a rather small guy, rather short, probably shorter than me even. But he was kind of a pretty hefty guy too, and he was a costing engineer. So one day, I'm sitting over in my office across the hall, and we start hearing this. And everybody kind of heard it because you could hear it in those halls. We rushed over, and in the men's John, which were all wooden partitions back in the day, he's kicking on the partition. We open the door, and here's Harry, the cost engineer, stuck in the toilet. he didn't check to see if the seat was down and his lovely little rear end got jammed in the bowl. We had to go and pull him out. But Rainbow Crafts was never the same after that. Or Play-Doh.
That reminds me of another story. My slide now. So, one unique thing about that Sycamore Street building was it had an intercom system.
It did?
Yeah. No, remember, you could use a phone. I think it might have been a special phone. So you could say, Howard Bollinger come to the conference room or something like that. Anybody could make an announcement like that.
Right. Okay.
And we were doing the $6 Million Man at the time, and we had one of these, full string voice activated mechanisms and stuff, and people were constantly putting that up to me. In like this quasi Steve Austin voice, call a rescue squad. It would just happen out of the blue. Danger alert. You hear that a couple times a day.
What was the one thing that you mentioned it when we were together a few days ago, where in the halls of the, where all the cubicles were or whatever, these people would take what? Baby alive, was it? Or
Oh, that was in the program.
was that in the program?
Yeah, it was in the
Okay, what it was is, we'd take baby alive and stick her up on the wall at the end of the hall, way down at the end of the hall, and have these blow darts. They would push it long way.
Yeah, for some, I might have been part of the creation of this, but yeah, well, of course you did. Yeah. You told me to do it. But, we had all kinds of stock, plastic stock, wood, whatever, in the prelim model shop to fabricate things, sheet, styrene, whatever you might need. And there was tubing about
Just the right diameter.
just like maybe 3/4 of an inch in diameter, styrene tubing. And we cut off the length of that, and we take a push pin, metal push pin. They had weight to that. I don't know if they do this anymore. And not only that, back then push pins had a 3/4 inch shaft. Most of them had a 1/2 inch shaft today, so you don't hurt anybody. So what we would do is to the butt end of the push pin, we would wrap a paper cone around it, trim it, tight tape it, and trim it to the diameter of that tube. Okay, so it was a perfect. So you had this perfect conical that could take the air that you're going to pump into it. And man, these things were accurate. I mean really accurate. Like just, and they would go 100 feet down the hall. And they were so powerful. I could bury one into a metal filing cable. I've done that another number of times. That'd be a relatively close range, like in a dozen feet or something like that. But you could bury that thing. That's how powerful they are, and extremely accurate. And what Howard was relating to with the baby alive, it was beyond that. It was Mike Ledger we had some sort of RC chassis from some vehicle we were exploring, doing an RC, or, we have all kinds of product around competitor. He had an RC chassis that he took a baby alive to and bolted it upright on the chassis. And then we had target practice. Yeah, somebody driving this thing, and his dumb dolls going around, and these darts are flying. It was the most insane thing you can imagine. It was really the nature of the place that we just
had a lot of fun. And in between time, we designed and engineered and sculpted and decorated and did the costumes for all of those wonderful Star Wars toys that you have.
Yeah.
And that was. I think
Let's go over here.
Oh, you want to go with the program?
You can go back to the program.
This is the product concept team circa 1983. And you'll notice in the back row about the 6th or 8th person from the right is Mark Boudreau. He worked in my group. And down left, third from the left on the bottom is Tim. And I thought that some of you people might have known Bob Allen, the 4th from the left in the back row. He did some of the work on because I've got submissions from Lucasfilm of reference material that were addressed to Bob. Because he was working on some of that stuff.
And he would have been my boss Dale was my boss at the time,
Yeah, Dale Goldberg, next to the young lady in the white. He's on the left.
He was just
intelligent.
He was just crazy smart and creative.
Yeah.
I remember he had this random list of concepts that he would come up with. They were just so stupid, but they were so funny. And I still remember one. It was a diving board with Mount Rushmore in relief on it. Like, what the hell is that? Dale, where's that coming from?
What is that, right? Right? No, in fact, Dale did, I don't know if you, many of you have looked through Kenner catalogs per se, but Dale did the Red Line electronic racing game, drag racing game thing that we did. It was a handheld thing way before its time. And he did that product.
Yeah, he was a brilliant Stanford engineer that came by way of Mattel.
Was he at Mattel?
Yeah.
You kidding?
No, it's like, that's the other thing about Kenner that people don't understand. When Bernie came, he kind of raided Mattel.
Oh, yeah.
We had all these people from Mattel, from Reagan, wasn't he from there?
Who?
Bill Reagan.
Oh, Bill Reagan.
And
Armando Garcia, Drew Holland became the VP of engineering. And yeah, Bernie brought a lot of people. Stan Woodward, who was my boss for a while, after Bill Reagan, I think, before, I lose track, 33 years kind of goes into a whole.
Yeah, Mattel could not have been happy with that whole.
Well, that's the reason they came to Kenner.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them got, or something like that. But I can tell you a story about Woodward. He hired a guy from Mattel named Joe Young. I think Joe Young was from Asia somewhere. And he put Joe Young in my group. And Joe was kind of a really aggressive fellow. And he used to, as time went on, only after about 6 months or something, started to get really aggressive in my group. And I would be walking down the hall and Joe would be in his cubicle or office, whatever. And he had his nunchucks out. You know, the nunchucks doing this thing. And he and I didn't mix. So one day, I was afraid he was going to kill me. Because he had his nunchucks and we were disagreeing about a lot of things. So I fired him that day. I took him to HR and said, Joe, out of here, you're done. So Stan Woodward was on vacation. He comes back and he says to me, Howard, I think that was the worst thing you could have ever done was to fire Joe Young. And I said, Stan, I don't give a crap. He was going to kill me with those what I said? Nunchucks, yeah, nunchucks. And so he says, well, I don't think you should have done it, and I'm going to hire him. He's still in town. I'm going to bring him back, and he's going to work for you. I said, okay. No, you aren't, because I'm leaving. I'm the hell with you. I walked out of my office, started packing up my stuff, and about 10 minutes later, he comes down and said, well, okay, I'm not going to fire you or let you go. It's okay. I called Joe back. And I had that happen to me a couple of times in Kenner. There was another fellow that was my boss for a while. I'll call him, I don't know, Joe Smith. And he was a lousy boss. He came from the electronics industry. And he interfered with everybody in my model shop. He would go down and change people's directions on things that we had talked about and stuff like this. And I put up with it. I talked to him, week after week. And when people would say, hey, Joe Smith came down and wanted to change the stuff. So Bernie was president at that time. And Bernie had hired this guy. And he used to wear leisure suits, the polyester leisure suit. And he had the worst body odor in the world. That was the other reason I didn't like him.
That was everybody knew that, yeah.
Yeah. How could you miss it, right? So one day, it finally came to a head. I went up to his office. I opened the door and I said, actually his name was Marty. I walked in and I said, Marty, you're the biggest phony I have ever met, and I don't want to work for you anymore. I went right up to Loomis's office and I opened the door and said, knock on, Bernie, come in. Hey, Bernie, I just told Marty he's the biggest phony I ever worked for in the world, and I don't want to work for him anymore. So a week later, Marty Ehrlich was fired. So, that's what I feel was the right thing to do. And it's not as funny as some of the other stuff.
know I was in that. I didn't know I was in that kind of jeopardy working for you.
Not you.
All right, let's see what else we got.
Yeah, what else?
So yeah, I put this together.
Hey, has anybody got a bottle of water?
Yeah. Here's one. Here's your towel. I'm only spinning.
What's that floating around? Okay, thanks. Go.
So the significance of this is twofold. Now I'll show that in subsequent slides. But the important thing about Kenner to really understand from an organizational standpoint is that you'll see this flat line in the organizational chart, okay? Well, there's a couple things missing outside that, like operations and legal, which would be their own bubbles. But everybody was equal, and there would have been a vice president above all these. And that is significant because it's so rare today to find a company that has product development or the creative teams on an equal par with the marketing teams or the business teams. And that's where the strength was from our creativity, because they couldn't tell us don't do that or don't chase that. We had tremendous freedom in chasing the ideas we chased, and why some of these things, like the fact that Jim Swearingen and David Quinn championing Star Wars, that would not have happened had it been a marketing and controlled company. It just would not have happened. That flat line was really important in Kenner's success, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, because I was there in about when the mid-70s, when General Mills, it was early 70s, I guess, because I went to 60s, started sending down marketing people from Minneapolis. And that was like the beginning of the influx of MBAs and stuff, taking control of the toy companies just in this very slow rise where they had the purse strings, and they started to be the managers of these toy companies, wherein previous to that, most of the toy companies, Fisher Price, Ideal, Kenner, were all started by individuals who just had this gut level feel for product, where the head was connected to the gut. And the way to come up with good ideas in the toy is subjective ideas, because they're all very subjective, right? Anything you look at in toys is an emotional contact, which really makes it hugely subjective. And when you don't get that connection between the head and the gut, it doesn't work. And that's what happened a lot when the NBA kind of control came with the toy realm. So, and I'm glad I wasn't there.
So I'll just kind of outline this. So there are preliminary design. And you all know preliminary, you don't know about us, because, for example, the Toys That Made Us episode about Star Wars or whatever, that was strictly focused on the preliminary design. They didn't interview any of the product designers that executed the toys or that evolved those toys from the concept onward. And Howard was VP of product design, and within that product design group, well, there's more than two groups. There was a make and play group too, but just to simplify things, there was boys' toys and girls' toys. I was hired into the girls' toy group, so that's how it kind of broke out. Just a kind of background on that.
Yeah, we were very effective.
Yeah, we were. Now the other thing that I talk about, I was assigned the designer on the first wave Star Wars 12-inch figures. And the reason I was assigned those figures is because the girls' toy group did all dolls, and they were considered dolls, okay? So, because my first thing I worked on was a $6 million man doll, this 12-inch figure. So it was natural to assign those, even though they were kind of a boys' line thing, to the girls' toy group, because we understood things like proportion, articulation, how to achieve that in the figures or whatever. So that's why those figures were, and I was assigned the ones that had no clothes. So I was assigned But because we had fashion designers in that group, and they were assigned Luke, Han, and Leia, and I was assigned Darth, R2, C-3PO, and Chewbacca. So that's how that happened, okay?
No fabric.
No fabric. Well,
the fabric pouch, though.
Well, and somebody, one of the fashion designers did the cake for Darth.
That's true.
But, you know, those were minor kind of things. Yeah, that's how that worked. And we decided to sculpt Darth because it would just been impossible to do an outfit of his, you know, like you would do it in normal fashion. It was the only way to do that thing.
Yeah, that brings to mind when we got the license from Star Wars, or from Lucas. You all know all that story about Jim and Dave Okada going blah, 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 bringing it back. We had a meeting in Cincinnati, and Georgia checked. We see Bernie shook his hand, we had the deal. At that point in time, it was my responsibility because I was heading out the concept group with Tim and all the rest of us that created your toys. I had to really bone up the department in certain areas. That's when I went to Hermosa Beach in California and found this fellow, John Gardner. He was living about, 2 blocks, I think, from the Pacific Ocean in this beautiful little cottage, him and his wife. And I finally convinced him to come to Cincinnati. John had left Mattel at that point. He worked there for many years and really created all kinds of contacts in the sculpting and art, areas for toy product. So I knew he was the right guy because we had a fellow named Francis Barnum and when Barney, he was the guy that sculpted the $6 million man. Right. And Barney's background, he was Cincinnati, he was a Cincinnati area guy. He was mostly effective doing Civil War diorama stuff. That was his main, and we had connected in Canada to do $6 million. So I got John Gardner, and John Gardner had all the contacts, and he was the most wonderful guy in the world. And he and his wife, and then my wife at that time, we became great friends. We brought him to Cincinnati, and he first hired Bill Lemon, who was an outside guy. And Bill did that first wax figure, and when I saw that wax figure come in, it was just the most exquisite, and I think it was, I don't know what it is. I know it was wax, I think. And it was either Han or Boba Fett, I can't remember. And then, therefore, and so on, John hired Rudy Vapp, and Rudy was from Cincinnati, and he was a sculptor. So Rudy came in after John decided to leave. Oh, and I'll tell you about why John left. One day, and Cincinnati has much more beautiful temperate jungle weather than here in Atlanta, right? No, it's pretty lousy weather. So one day, John and I and our wives were out eating dinner somewhere at the salad bar, and I'm there dishing up stuff, and John too is doing the same. He turns to me, he says, "You little son of a..." It was snowing outside in January or February. He says, "You little son of a... how'd you ever get me to come to this place? It's terrible weather. It's not like Hermosa Beach." And I felt very sorry for him, but he had signed a contract. Tough movies, God, I got you, buddy. So he was the guy that did all the configurations of all those figures. You have to pay homage to this guy because he was the leader of this, our sculpting. Until Rudy.
This next, we already talked about this. These are the 4 figures I did. We'll just move on from there. And then you got this story, Howard.
Oh, yeah. Who invented the little lightsaber to keep out in the arm? Me! As the story goes, and I just read up on this somewhere, in the past couple weeks. I didn't even realize what they had done. They said that at first they were trying to do a drum inside the figure with a little wheel and putting out a piece of filament, filament thread, whatever, and the thing would come out, it would go like that. No, and I just walked into Bob Lindsay, I think it was Bob Lindsay or Jack Farrell's office, and they were discussing what the hell we should do with this. I don't even So I just said, make the thing slide out, put a slot inside, put that in there, and like that. And that's what.
This is an interesting. So this is an interesting story about how prelim and design development groups work together. Okay, so Jim Swearingen proposed and did the design of the original Death Star playset model that you see on the left. Okay, and what would happen if there was a concept that was ripe to be turned over to the development group, we would have a meeting called a turnover meeting. And this is a formal meeting to turn a concept, maybe very half-baked, it might just be a sketch or whatever, to the development groups, okay? So, but this went pretty far and pretty well proven, his playset. It was really nice, pretty nice design, you know. But I was assigned, what happened at this point is that the silos began to melt down because we had so much Star Wars stuff to do, and then they knew that even though I was in the girls' toy group, this was assigned to me, you know, because they knew I could handle it. So I was assigned this, and the interesting thing about this is through discussions with Howard, the compactor was separate, and we decided it had to fit into the playset itself. You know, it was just weird being separate like that. So it was decided to incorporate the compactor on the bottom floor, which was a new floor. Now you have to understand that the geometry of this thing is like a compound curve. So we were going up straight, and this always bothered me about the final execution of this. But we couldn't bother to do that compound curve, so it's just a straight curve. So it's a weird. It's not a sphere. Let's put it that way. As much as I would have loved to have more sphericality to it. But so that's one of the changes that I did. Then you can see all the difference in like the walkway that was incorporated that Jim didn't have in there. You know, with the big scene, you know, with the rope going over and all that. So that was all kind of coming from me. Plus the styling of the whole thing, you know, to make it look, you know, like the grid on the top and the panel, the wall panel, and art directed the art that really great illustrators did for those panels. So that's just an interesting aspect of how we work there and how prelim related to product development, yeah.
And Tim and/or whoever was working with him also had to be worrying about getting a cost engineer working with them.
Engineers.
See how much this thing was really going to cost, because sales was wanted to be sold at a certain A price.
Or the engineers say, well, you can't do it like that, and you got, you know, they want to put together one way, and I'm like, that's going to screw up the aesthetics, so you work out some solution. There's so much that went into the executional aspect of the design development that isn't really appreciated as much as it's a lot of work went into designing that platform. How it would go together, how a kid's going to be able to, can a kid do this, can a kid stack that thing and put it together, and how simple it is. Those things all had to be addressed. The engineer saying we can't do the costing engineer saying it's too expensive. So you have these negotiations as much as battles to try to resolve this stuff. So as in most product design, it's a compromise, and there are a lot of people involved in the solution. So that's just an example. Yeah, one aspect of the playset was that the trash compactor monster was not defined, and as you recall in the movie, all you saw was a stock with the eye on top, right? Well, I lobbied that we can't just do a stick with this eye on top. It's got to be fleshed out as a character. So, and that was a tough thing to negotiate because it was going to cost money that they hadn't previously figured into this thing. Some of that preliminary cost was done before the turnover meeting, so everybody has an expectation of what this thing's going to be on retail. So I'm negotiating, you got to do this whole character, and then basically it's okay, but it can only be one piece and it can't be decorated, we can't afford to decorate, so it had to be one-piece vinyl, so it had to be molded in one piece. And the constriction of that, tooling-wise, is I couldn't do a stock that went straight up. It had a curve to it, so it could come out of the mold, which never made me happy. But so that's why that curve is there instead of having the stock almost come vertical, as I would have really appreciated to have that done. But in any case, I didn't spend a lot of time designing. Just a couple drawings, and I worked with who did I work with? The sculptor on this. I can see his face. So we'll move on. But I don't want to give him credit, I guess, is the point. But the interesting thing is that this creature my design was approved by Lucasfilm, and now it's kind of the model for any compact. What was the name? Dianoga or something? Dianoga. Of course, it wasn't that name when we did it. We didn't know this stuff. But it's now kind of become the model. You see illustrations of it. They roughly follow this design, which is kind of cool to have designed a character in the canon.
Oh yeah, here's a little story. At one point in time, me and Joe Mendelson, or I should say Joe Mendelson and I, because Joe was president at that time, after Bernie left to create the MAD division of General Mills up in New York City. Joe Mendelson and Pete Kelly, myself, and I think Mark went with us out to George's house. That was still in his house in San Anselmo, where they first went to see the figures early on, Jim and David Potter. We went out there for a meeting about Empire Strikes Back, and in the discussion of what was doing, I think Mark showed some models of what we were going to do for the next wave of stuff, product, and Marcia, who was like George's editor
And wife.
Yes, she was. Right, she was. She came up with the idea and it kind of introduced it in this meeting. And if any of you ever knew Joe Mendelson, Joe was kind of a very reserved fellow who was the president of our company, and he had been there forever. And when Marcia said, gee, I want to put these little characters in the film, and they're going to be furry little characters for preschool kids, because we need to capture a preschool audience too. And we had had so much success selling figures and the whole storyline concept that was like conflict, lightsabers, cannons, tauntauns, all of these, conflictual situations. And Joe Mendelson kind of got totally apoplectic about putting these little preschool figures in the film. And him and Marcia kind of got into it really big time in this meeting. And George didn't say too much, but we all know what the decision was. We all know what the decision was. But Joe Mendelson never did want to have those things. And I guess they were pretty successful in and of themselves.
Yes, these guys.
Yeah, very successful. And afterwards, after they were in the film, and we did it in flush first, and I was looking through my catalog the other day, and I forgot, I'll be 87 in October, but that's why I forget a lot. We did preschool figures of Ewoks and all kinds of little play sets with those characters and stuff. Yeah. So they must have been pretty successful. Yeah. So Marcia won. Once I knew that, or I was studying this, I went and looked about her, and she kind of really, from what I've read, really made a lot of good decisions for George and did some really great editing and guidance of things that, between him and her. She was really a pretty smart lady. So that's that story. Oh, and impressions of George. I don't know, somebody like you, Steve, probably knew George pretty closely, right? Well, since he doesn't know I remember the first time I met him. It was at a meeting somewhere out. It was a celebration meeting, I think, of our success with Star Wars or something. It was the first time I met him, and I shook his hand, and boy, his handshake was, no, you're supposed to be me. It was like that, and he seemed to be a very bashful guy or something to me. Yeah, and he just, I was expecting, yeah, hi, I'm George Lucas, how you doing? No, he was it seemed like a very humble fellow, and,
Okay, we're running over, so we're going to go through some of this stuff. Ryan's over there going like this.
Hey guys, yes, let's, with that, we do need to cut it short.
You're not cutting it short.
I'm sorry, we're going to get along. We got one more minute, and we're going to cut it, but I want to time it, because when that gets to a minute, I'm going to have to cut you off. So hurry up, one more story, fast.
One more story. My wife, when Hasbro had let the Star Wars contract lapse with Lucasfilm, and the next 3 films were announced by George that he was going to do, we were at Hasbro contesting with Mattel to get the license from Lucasfilm, right? And the big thing back in that day when that was going on was globalization for toy corporations to sell their toys more worldwide. My wife knew somebody at Gray Advertising. This person at Gray Advertising, who Hasbro had hired to do a study on kids' globalization, playing with toys. They contacted my wife because she had been in research with people at Procter & Gamble. She was assigned to do a global study of kids, how they play with toys, and they wouldn't pay for her to go anywhere to do it. So in Cincinnati, she had to contact all of these, different nationality clubs of people that come from a certain place, Germany or England, and they had she gathered all of these kids together from all these clubs, did this study. And this study that she did for Gray Advertising was a pivotal piece of work that was presented to Lucasfilm at a meeting in Cincinnati when they came to make the judgment who got the contract. And it was presented by Alan Klein, one of the top guys at Hasbro. And that study that my wife gave us was part of us getting the contract for the next 3 films.
Oh, wow. All right. Awesome.
The one thing I put in this
Let's kill your mind.
No.
Hurry.
Next thing. If ever there was anybody in this industry that I loved more than anybody, it was Bernie Loomis. This guy was the best and most prolific toy person I ever knew. And when I presented Family Treehouse, which I did to Bernie, I presented and said, Bernie, here's this treehouse, it's behind your house out in Kenwood. And when you open it up, there's a little family in it. And Bernie reached over, pulled this treehouse model to me and said to the room gathered, he says, we're doing this. Boom.
Yeah, you're getting the thing. Respect.
That's amazing. Awesome. All right, so what we're going to do real quick, we're going to do the auction, go outside, do a picture, and then we're going to do room sales. Woo! So that's the plan.
Thank you for joining me for the final episode of the Rogue Fun panel series. In preparing for the episode, I found myself laughing over and over again at the stories Tim and Howard shared with us that Saturday evening. And as a collector, I've learned how important it is to hear these explanations and stories from those who were there and who experienced them firsthand. It's hard to imagine someone wanting to hear your work stories and hanging on your every word decades after they occurred. But that's what it was like in that room that night. It was raucous and funny, and it was a celebration of the friendship and respect Tim and Howard have for one another. So I'd like to thank Tim and Howard for spending a weekend with all of us in Kennesaw. And I'd also like to thank the other wonderful panelists for providing a stellar lineup that never lagged. And I can proudly say that all 5 were tremendously entertaining and made Rogue Fun a once-in-a-lifetime event. Jerry Hancock, Ryan Shaw, Gary Ray Weaver, John Celestri, Steve Sansweet, Rich Alott, and Paul Harrison. Thank you for sharing your stories, your knowledge, and your experiences with us. And a huge thank you to the creators of the Rogue Fun event. Jason Wasuko, Glenn Williams, Narayan Naik, and the rest of the Georgia team, you hosted an event that was so special and so connective, I'm still trying to process all of it. And a big thank you to Mark Rusciano, the producer of the panels and the live event. If it weren't for Mark, I wouldn't have the audio from these presentations to share with you. And if you've enjoyed these panels, please share them with a friend. Help me to get the word out about the podcast and about events like Rogue Fun. And if you'd like to join the Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors, simply Google Georgia Alliance of Star Wars Collectors, or go to gaswc.club for more information. And if you're curious to hear more about the entirety of the Rogue Fun weekend, I'll have a series coming later this summer that will recount my experience in Georgia. It will feature my thoughts as well as some of the moments and conversations I recorded with collectors along the way. And the other new podcast series I teased earlier this month will now premiere at the end of July. It will provide an in-depth look at one of the most profound and impactful Star Wars series and will hopefully prepare you for the story's next anticipated chapter. And I have more episodes exploring some familiar toy shows and some new ones as well. And in the next episode, I'll return to my seat behind the Galactic News Desk to give you a roundup of some of the most important and exciting Star Wars stories you may have missed this month. This is definitely going to be a summer to remember, here on Star Wars, Prototypes and Production.